we think of the holiness movement today, a lot of times we think of a particular group of churches that are associated by common beliefs, kind of like a Christian denomination or association. But all the holiness movements from today come from the broader overarching holiness movement from the 1800s. Now, this movement was not about particular churches or signs on the door. It's not characterized that way. Instead, it was a revival of Christian thought, which focused on the promotion of the blessing of holiness. Okay, so what is the blessing of holiness? Here's the backstory. In the 1600s and 1700s, Christianity had become so cold, and people were just called Christians because, they were born into the church, and a lot of times they had no personal walk with Christ for themselves. So the Great Awakenings happens, and these people see their need for salvation, for acceptance of Jesus Christ, and they have these very, very loaded emotional salvation experiences. Well, because of the nature of circuit riders, these people weren't becoming discipled and pastored, and Bible study it just wasn't going so well, and so naturally we have a lot of problems with Christian maturity. So what the holiness people longed for is that Christian maturity and perfection could also be a crisis experience in which you receive it and then boom, like you're just walking in the love of Christ. They were very idealistic. So Timothy Merritt in particular, he says that he longs for the day when sanctifications would become as commonplace as salvations. And he goes, oh, what a day, what can we do to hasten it? So what he did to hasten it is he began publishing the Guide to Holiness. Now, others had different approaches. Sarah Langford began the Tuesday night meeting for the promotion of holiness. Phoebe Palmer, 1843, she published the book The Way of Holiness. Hannah Whitall Smith, she also published a book on holiness, The Christian Secret of a Happy Life. In 1867, we have the first National Holiness Association camp meeting in New Jersey, and in 1868, the second one was in Pennsylvania. Now, just how big was the holiness movement? For example, Pennsylvania is still very rural. We don't have advertisement with technology. We don't have modern transportation. We don't have planes. We don't have cars. And the towns are still, a lot of them are very small, a few hundred people, a few thousand people at most. But in 1868, when they had their holiness camp meeting in Pennsylvania, they had 25,000 people in attendance. That's huge. Another example, Phoebe Palmer, she was one of the main revivalist speakers of the holiness movement. She alone spoke at over 300 camp meetings. To give you an idea of just how big the holiness movement was. And even though it was originally to reform Methodism, it impacts Quakers, Congregationalists, Dutch Reform, Baptists, Presbyterians. The holiness movement had a very wide appeal to all of American Christianity, even though there were definitely people that just hated it and just tried to do everything they could to stop it. It just kept spreading. It just kept going until about the 1880s and 90s when it started to splinter into those independent churches and independent movements. So the holiness movement, we should also recognize it had a very big impact on American Christianity, but even culture, because they were so passionate about ending social ills. They were so involved in ending slavery and the temperance movement, and even early feminism, which was the women's rights to vote, and that movement started in a Methodist church house during the holiness movement. And Oberlin College, which was a college that promoted holiness, was the first college to be for men and women. So we see that these holiness people, they were radical in their time. They were very different, and they shaped American Christianity and culture in so many ways. They're so inspiring to learn from, and I'm really looking forward to sharing their stories in depth. And Oh, let me tell you, they have some stories. Some of them are actually hilarious. I'm really looking forward to digging into it more, and I hope that you'll join me.